Our upcoming guest speaker is a software engineering and IT transformation professional working with clients to bring in new ways of working using Agile and DevOps. She has worked with Fortune 100 companies across diverse industry domains such as manufacturing, banking and finance, insurance, and telecommunications, just to name a few. She is also a member of Leader Excellence at Harvard Square. Her focus areas are digital transformation, software program and project management, agile lean strategies and DevOps, and strategic planning and transformation. She is currently serving as the global head engineering transformation at L&T Infotech Limited. In a few minutes from now, she'll be steering this session by sharing her immense knowledge on how we can ensure security in product aligned IT. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to your screens right now is none other than Ms. Archana Joshi.
Hi everyone. Today's topic for discussion that I have is security in product aligned IT. My name is Archana Joshi. I head the transformation team at LTI. So essentially what we look at from a transformation standpoint is bringing in the techniques of agile, DevOps, platforms, as well as new age technologies to drive the desired agility in various organizations. Now, today's conference that we are having is primarily centered around the topic of security. And that is something which got me thinking to say that, okay, we have gone through so many transformations from a product alignment standpoint. And there have been some great lessons that we have come across those experiments. And I would say not just experiments, also the implementations as well, right? And hence I felt that how does security play a role in this product aligned IT, productized IT, and all these buzzwords that you hear along is something which is important to discuss in a forum like this and get views and understand your views as well from an industry standpoint to see what is it that's happening across. So with that, let's get started with the topic. And I have a specific question for all of you who are listeners out here in this virtual conference today. The question is, when you think about product alignment and productized IT, what does that mean, right? So I know that when this question gets asked, I hear various responses to it. Some of the things that people say is that product alignment versus project alignment, and you see a lot of these ideas floating around. They say it's all about empowered teams. Okay, so empowered teams is something which you hear. Other aspect that you also hear is people saying that product alignment means it's aligned as per certain business products which are there. It's aligned more and more towards value streams rather than having projects which are doing a specific work. You also hear folks say that you cannot do product alignment without you doing agile practices and practicing agile. So agile is something which is an intrinsic part of product alignment. Other thing that you hear is that products have a different life cycle compared to a project, which means in project, you have a specific start date, you have a specific end date, you finish the work which is there in your hand, and then you dispose. Whereas in a product aligned world, it's more about an ongoing and a continuous basis that you are working and developing new things and new features, right? So it's more about a continuous stream of work that is happening. Other things which also I hear is where when I especially talk to executives, and something that they bring out is that unlike the annual funding that we had, when you move to more and more productized IT or product aligned world, it's all about ongoing funding, quarterly funding, looking at making sure that you are providing the funds on a periodic basis. And usually quarterly is what we hear about. So people also say that in a projectized way, you just fund for the project, or you have an annual budget within which you fund some things, whereas in products, you fund the product. And usually you look at from a quarterly basis how much funds you need to allocate. Other things about value streams we did speak about. One thing which is looked at as persistent teams, right? So, especially this comes out when I'm talking to developers and testers and the teams who are actually developing solutions. They say that product alignment is all about persistent teams. We don't need to leave our teams when our work is done. We continue to operate with the same team. And unlike in a project teams where we just come together for a project duration and then we disperse off, right? So persistent teams is something which is there. People then say that in product alignment, it's about end-to-end accountability, which means it doesn't matter whether or what role I'm playing, whether I'm a developer, a tester, a scrum master, or a product manager, or a release manager, or whatever role they might be playing. I and my whole team is responsible for end-to-end delivery of the product, which means developing that solution, maintaining that solution, getting the feedback, ensuring the feedback is again delivered and incorporated into the solution, and the cycle continues until the end of life for that product, right? So there's a whole aspect of end-to-end accountability, which is something which you hear in product alignment. Other word that you hear in product alignment is all about being adaptive and being able to pivot, right? And this is something which you see a concept from the lean startup as well, where people say that you pivot when things are not going in your direction. You have a flexibility to adapt based on the situation that you have faced in. There's a whole lot of aspect of rather than looking at outputs from a project standpoint, means is it a requirement document finished, or is my project reached a certain milestone and a certain stage. In product alignment, it's more about the outcomes, features, and the work that you measure is in terms of the end outcomes, right? Continuous delivery is something that we did allude to earlier. And here, continuous delivery is more from the tooling standpoint, where you have the ability to churn out features on an ongoing basis, right? So if I look at these aspects, I very rarely hear the word security. I very rarely hear the terms terms related to roles like a CISO, which is a security officer, right? And this is something which I've consistently observed, no matter whom I talk to, even if I talk to in a, let's say, a IT service world, if I talk to tech companies, if I talk to companies where IT is one of their cost centers, this is a consistent thing that you hear are the words that you see on the screen, but you rarely see people bringing out the word security when they talk in terms of the product alignment. And then that's exactly the question that security people ask me, saying that we hear all these things in productized world. What happens to security? Do we even have a role to play? Does the function exist? Does it not exist? Do we still have to have CISO as a function, or does it does it disappear? What exactly happens when you have security and productized IT comes into there, right? Because security, I'm sure all of you look at your own organizations and you will realize that most often that not, security is something which is a central function, right? Security, risk management at an org level is usually a central function reporting directly into the business. Of late, yes, cyber security, physical security, and then the business risks, etc. These functions are coming together, but most often than not, it's a central function. And hence the question that people who are dealing with security usually ask is what happens in this state when we move to product aligned IT? what role does security play there? And that exactly is where I would like to talk a little bit deep into, saying that what happens and what does that change that security as a function has to undergo when your IT organization and then eventually the business organization, all of them move towards a productized way of doing things, right? So I would say one word to look at what happens to the security, right? And that one word I would say is decentralization. So earlier, security, which was the centralized function, may still exist in large enterprises, but the role or the work that they are doing kind of gets more and more decentralized across various facets of the productized organization, right? To start with, if you are a productized IT organization, there needs to be a close handshake and close pairing between a CISO function, a CISO officer, whoever is playing the CISO role, which is the Chief Information Security Officer, and the CIO role, right, which is more from a technology standpoint. So this pairing is crucial if you have to make sure your productized IT is truly functioning the way or the vision that you have. The other aspect, which is there, is about extreme automation. Now, if you are doing decentralization, you cannot govern that decentralization unless you have good automation in place. Because let's say now, just imagine your own situation. I'll give a very simple example. So let's imagine you are planning an event in your let's say day-to-day work. So you are planning, let's say, a wedding, or you're planning somebody's birthday party, or you're planning some nice party for your friend, right? And you are the person who is made in charge with all the arrangements. Now, in those cases, the only way, you cannot, of course, run around all the places and make sure the things are happening correctly, because there are too many things to take care of, right? If it's a party, you have to look at the caterers, you have to make sure the decorations are in place, the invitations have gone out. If there are some party games to be played, you have to look at how do you engage the people who are coming into the party. You have to look for a venue. You need to make sure all the people who are coming in have appropriate places to park their vehicles, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a whole lot of arrangements that you need to take care of. So while you are responsible for those arrangements, you start delegating those things. So you say, okay, probably cater, let somebody else take care of it, report to me how is happening, right? And what is happening from a, let's say, invitation standpoint. Let's say you assign it to somebody else, and then you say, okay, tell me how it is happening, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a whole lot of decentralizing things that you are doing through delegation. Now, imagine the same role where you are now a security officer in a company, where you are now planning the security for an organization. And you want to make sure that everything which is happening and everything that is going out in production in the live environment is compliant to the standards. You cannot afford to do that if you're not decentralizing, and you cannot afford to do that if you don't have automation which tells you that feedback on an ongoing basis, saying how is that implementation of security happening, right? So in productized IT, when we are talking about lot of deliverables ongoing consistently in production, where you're talking about 400 builds a day, you're talking about so many deployments happening per minute. If you don't have automation to govern how those deployments are compliant, you are not going to be able to function correctly in the productized IT world or be successful in it, right? So automation is crucial. The other aspect, which also is important, is that securities, as soon as it becomes decentralized, it's a responsibility of each and every individual to make sure that they understand the practices and fulfill those practices on from day one from a security standpoint, which means if I'm a developer, I need to know secure coding practices. If I'm a BA or a product owner, I need to do and understand concepts of threat modeling. If I am a tester, I need to be able to test the security lapses and the challenges which could be there, right? Let's say if I'm a compliance officer in a company, I need to understand how these practices are getting inbuilt into the software SDLC, and I need to have that handshake between them. So there's a whole lot of practice change from a security standpoint that you need to incorporate in your software delivery lifecycle. And if it's a maintenance, in the way you are monitoring your apps, right? And that's where you see a lot of these things saying, how is your security monitoring happening on the production stage, right? So you have to do both while developing as well as after you deliver monitoring as well. So there's a lot of inbuilt practices that you need to bring in. And last but not the least is integrated metrics. Many a times organizations have all these things which I spoke about, but those fail because your metrics don't align with the metrics which a CISO function has. So CISO function will have metrics related to compliance, metrics related to risk assessment. CISO function will have metrics related to the lapses which are happening, right? Warnings, audits, these are the kind of metrics they track. And if you go and ask a software team or an IT team what metrics they track, you will hear things like technical debts, you will hear things like velocity. If it's a monitoring system, you will hear things like SLAs, you will hear things like SLOs, right? So these metrics never align, and you continue to find that tussle where the CISO doesn't believe the IT doesn't get along with the CISO, saying that CISO is not helping us, right? So if you want to bring in security within a productized IT world where fast delivery is the key, where team empowerment is the key, where agile mentality and agile mindset is the key, you need to look at all these aspects to be changed from a security standpoint, right? So just to give you an example, this is an illustration for one of the clients that I was working with. So, of course, when I say we were a team who were looking at this together with our team having DevOps experts. Our team, of course, had security and cybersecurity experts, and team had our agile coaches as well, right? So all of us were working on this initiative. So the ask which was there here was for one of our financial institution, and it was about bringing in almost 1800 odd apps which are there in an ecosystem onto the DevSecOps journey, right? And DevSecOps was one aspect of it. The bigger goal that we were achieving with this client was about the productized IT, right? So the ask was, hey, I'm on my productized IT journey. My security function is not really going along well. Can you guys come and do something about it? This is my landscape. I have about 1800 plus apps. I have about 8,000 environments, both on-prem, cloud, all of that mix. You can imagine it's a huge client base. You have to look at pipeline services, so on and so forth, right? So it's a huge complete landscape of a typical enterprise IT that you might see in any kind of a global bank, right? So it will have heterogeneous tech stack. It will have a lot of silos. It will have a lot of functions which are there. And given finance, the focus on risk security is very high, right? Now, some of the things that we did from our side, and I'll address one of all the four aspects that I alluded to in the previous slide one by one, right? So the first one which we looked at was the CISO and the CIO pairing, right? So this is something when we went in, we did an exercise. We actually started off with a design thinking exercise to bring in the security function and the IT function together in a workshop to even figure out what does this whole thing mean for each of the stakeholders, right? So that handshake was very important for us to understand the views from both the sides, to make sure that when we are looking at this, we are not just taking an IT view, we also bring in the security view there. So that's the first thing that we did. The second thing, from an extreme automation standpoint, as you can see on the slide, there was a lot of tools, technologies that were used, right from solutions on AWS to Atlassian stack like a Jira, It was containerized also, so there were containerized, there were legacy also. So you can see everything under the sun. You might be able to look at all these things existed in this complex heterogeneous landscape, right? So these were the kind of tools that were used for that extreme automation to monitor and track and see what is happening from a security standpoint whenever you are doing IT work, right? And as you can see here, you see things like Splunk, App Dynamics, which typically function in a monitoring stage. And you also see tools like a black duck check marks, which is more used in a development side of things, right? So when a new code is getting developed, you want to make sure your coding practices is followed correctly. You would go for something like a check marks and black duck. Whereas once your solution is into production, you want to monitor it consistently, you would configure things like App Dynamics and Splunk. Now, the benefits, right, after we did all of this, and there were immense benefits that we saw. This was a multi-year journey. I wouldn't say this was like done in a day or so. It took us 2 years. It was a huge landscape which was there to make this work, right? So you see a lot of these benefits, right, from DevSecOps adoption, deployment frequency, operational efforts reduction, code quality, etc., right? And why I'm stressing on these metrics is that you might say, hey, these metrics don't look like a security metric as such, right? But these benefits are talking more from an end user standpoint. You're absolutely right. These benefits are talking from an end user standpoint. And these benefits are possible from an end user standpoint only if your security is decentralized and well integrated into IT. If that is not happening, you can never have an improved deployment frequency, because every time you want to do a deployment, a shared team like a security team would act like a policer and policing authority to say you cannot do a deployment, right? But if you have decentralized it, if you have brought in the automation, if you have brought in the right metrics, if you have brought in the right practices, then you can achieve these kind of things in the benefits from an end user standpoint, right? Now, this piece did not be like, I'm sure you can appreciate the fact that given the scope, it was not a ride without its own share of challenges, right? So we had to do certain implementations to transform this whole landscape, right? So one of the things that we looked at was shared versus dedicated roles, right? Now, when I say shared and dedicated roles, this is mainly from a security standpoint, which means that do I have a security expert shared across multiple pod teams? Do I have a dedicated role for every single value stream? Or should I look at just a central function governing and participating in a PI planning on a regular basis, right? So those were the decisions we had to make on the ground. And this is something which we did where for some of the value streams which were more, I would say, high risk applications, we had dedicated roles there from the CISO function working with the teams. In cases where there were more internal apps and all, we had shared roles there, right? Now, another thing that we did was Agile was implemented not just in the IT space, it was implemented in the CISO and the risk space also. And when I say risk space, here, given it's a bank, it's not just the cybersecurity risk that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the risk from an entire financial standpoint as well, right? So the CISO function was responsible for cybersecurity risk, financial risk, as well as the overall compliance risk, regulatory risk that comes in. Now, one thing that we did here to make this whole thing work efficiently was we started implementing Agile in that function as well. And this was one of the key things to make sure that handshake between an IT and the CISO organization happens well. Other aspect was, which was there, that when we looked at the security architecture for this entire solution, we had to look at the cloud and the on-prem security as well, because when you have a cloud security, some of the security risk is taken up by the cloud providers, whereas in on-prem you pretty much have that entire risk and you have to be more diligent about it. So there was a combination of these things you had to look at. Tools, of course, you saw the slide on the tools previously, so all of that was incorporated into the pipelines which were there. Lot of I would say education was done to bring in the concepts of threat modeling to a product owner. So you can imagine 1,800 apps on an average. Even if I say there's a product owner across two of these apps or three of these apps, we are talking about a huge numbers of business analysts, product owners, product managers, right, which go in hundreds. So there's a lot of education you need to do to these guys to make them understand the concepts of threat modeling. Similarly, education from a security coding practices, and here it was a combination of risk reward mechanisms we brought in to make sure the mindset is incorporated within the developers and the testers on secure coding, secure testing, right? Coaching, mentoring, of course, is something which is there as part of the transformation. Periodic OKRs, which is your objective key results, was something which was important as well, because as I said, integrated metrics is crucial. And when you are going through this journey, having these periodic key results to look at how we are doing the transformation journey, are we really achieving the objectives of decentralization from a security standpoint, was important as well. So periodic OKRs kind of helped us to make sure we are focused on our goal. And then we started doing some interesting, I would say, measurements as part of our sprint pipelines and all. Not just technical debt, we also started measuring what we call a security debt. So that was an integrated metric which was shown to the teams on a regular basis. And of course, a lot of standardization which was brought in from how you do testing, tooling, and so on and so forth, right? So if you look at it, given that the scale was huge, as I said, this was not done in a day, it was a multi-year program. So we had to also bring in a waves kind of approach where we decide which set of applications, which set of IT piece goes into the productized IT way of doing things, and how do we pick up those waves of applications first and decentralize security in those areas only, and not boil the ocean by bringing in everything at the same time. So this was one of the important factors as well. And the way we aligned those waves were that when we made our value streams, within a particular value stream, there are a bunch of apps which are categorized as security risk 1, risk 2, risk 3. So there were about 3-4 levels of security which we had. Based on that categorization, we looked at what should be the DevSecOps approach and the pipeline we need to take. Based on that, we brought in all these other concepts to make them work and looked at the shared dedicated roles as well. So in a nutshell, if you ask me what does security mean for a productized IT, I would say security is in the heart of the success if you want to make productized IT work. You cannot afford to ignore security and not address it from day one if you are moving to productized IT. If you leave it for later, it's going to be more and more difficult to make it work and make your productized IT journey successful. So the sooner you tackle this subject is going to be helpful for you. So on that note, I hope you found this experience sharing helpful. Would love to hear your comments and feedback. And I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.